Okay, so I'm going to go over basically OOP, Object-Oriented Programming, basically the principles. So I'm going to start out with the basics. So let's just say OOP, and let's start with a class. So what is a class? So a class, you can think of it as like a template or like a blueprint, and basically the class tells you how to create an object and what methods and members that it has. So for instance, if you wanted to create a student object, you would need a blueprint and how to create that student object and what variables it has, such as, so it would have that student, each student would have a name, each student would have maybe an ID number, and then also with that student there might be different methods and things like that, but for this example I'm just going to go over a student with a name and an ID. So basically to create a class, I mean, like I said, it's basically a blueprint or a template to help you create objects. So for example, like a student, obviously, if you're creating some kind of database or something, you would want multiple students. You would want to have an object for each student. And that's basically called an instance. And this would be our student class. So this class would have what's called a constructor. Put open parent, close pen, but a constructor is just the method that you would use to create a new student object. So I'll just write out an example. Student, when you call a constructor, the type of the object, let's just call it, we'll just call it S1, just to be lazy. And then the assignment operator, because you want to assign this object to this variable called S1, which is of type student. So new, whenever you see the word new, you're basically creating a new object in the heap. You don't really have to understand that too much, but there's two types of memory. One area of the memory is going to be heap. One is going to be called the stack, but that's for a different topic or a different video. But new is allocating memory to the heap. But you don't really need to understand that, but basically new, and then you would say student, open paren, close paren. So this is the constructor. This is the type and the name of the variable, the name of the object, the assignment operator saying you're going to assign this new object to S1, and it's going to be of type student. And how you're creating this object is the constructor. The constructor in here would be this. It would be whatever the name of the class is, you would see the method that is the same. So you're calling the constructor to create a new object, a new student object, or you might also hear an instance of this class. So you're using this blueprint. Now that you've created an object, whatever's in here, like let's say string name, since you use the constructor, whatever variables are in here, this new object will have those variables. That's what the blueprint's for. Basically says, hey, every student object will have a name, and then maybe if you use like an int for ID. So every student will have a name and an ID, and then in this class, we just have the constructor, which just creates a new object, and most likely inside your body of the constructor, you will have what's called a default constructor, which doesn't take any arguments. I am not passing in any arguments to this constructor. That's basically saying, hey, just give me a student object. And just give me the default values. So most likely when you're coding the body, you would just set the name equal to maybe null or a default name. You would set the ID maybe equal to 0 or generate an ID. That's kind of up to you. But that is the constructor and basically a class. So also in your class, not every class, I think this is a good idea to wrap your head around, because in the beginning when you're programming, you're only using one class. And a lot of times you might have a student class, but then you have a main method, and all the magic is happening in a single class. And that doesn't really help you understand classes too well. So just to give you an idea, a lot of the times, let's say you have a student, you would have multiple different classes. So you don't want, basically what it's called is cohesion. So you want high cohesion and loose coupling. And what that means is a student class with high cohesion means that everything contained in this class should be highly relatable. So that would be high cohesion. Everything in here relates to student. We shouldn't have anything that relates to, let's say if we have a course class. We have a course class. And let's say if we have, I'll explain this in a second, a DAO class. The job of, it's called data access object. The job of this class is basically helper methods to help save to a database. So there's methods in here that actually, a lot of times if you're using MySQL, you'll have SQL code in here, SQL statements. This will usually, if you're using Java, it'll use what's called JDBC, Java Database Connection Library. So basically this JDBC allows you to connect to a database and write SQL statements. So you're going to use a certain library in Java called JDBC to set up your connection to the database, and then usually you're going to have a DAO, data access object class, which is helper methods to maybe save to the database or get input from the database. This would be all your kind of your CRUD functions, create, read, update, delete. So that's just basically an acronym, all the different operations to relational databases. But yeah, so this is kind of how a application might actually look when you're doing object oriented. I mean, there's a lot more into it, but this is just the basics. So this gives you an idea that, hey, we might have multiple different, classes. So student, you wouldn't want course methods or course variables inside a student class. You just want student related stuff. You want high cohesion, which means everything in here is closely related. You shouldn't have methods that are reaching out to the database in this class, because this class, the goal of this class is just to create a student object. That's the only goal. And coupling, so here are these two terms. So basically, you want high cohesion, which is everything is closely related and glued together. And if stuff is not related, you want to pull that out and create it in its own class. Like we could merge all these classes together and just make one big sloppy class that has all the courses and the students, and it has all the helper methods to reach out to the database. We could merge these all into one class, but that is really sloppy and creates a lot of problems. you want to focus on separation of concerns, and the two things, like I said, you want high cohesion, which means everything in this class should be closely related. And also, these classes shouldn't be dependent on each other. That's what loose coupling means. So coupling is saying, if I change something in this student class, I shouldn't have to go change it in the course class. I shouldn't have to go change it in the data access object class. I shouldn't have to change it in all my other classes. I should just have to make those changes here. That's what loose coupling is. Okay, so that goes over that.
Thanks for watching, guys. Give a like, subscribe to the channel.